Good afternoon. Thank you for waiting. I'm Dan Thomas. I'm the Communications Director and the spokesman for the President of the UN General Assembly. Thank you for attending this media stakeout following today's informal dialogue of the General Assembly. Please allow me to introduce Dr. Vesna Pusic, Deputy Speaker of Parliament and a former First Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign and European Affairs of her country, Croatia, which has nominated her as a candidate for the position of the next Secretary General of the United Nations. Ma'am, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your interest. This is, how can I say, this is a first for me, but this is a first for the United Nations, and this is probably why this event is so important. I'm not sure to what extent was everybody aware of the impact and importance that the opening of the selection process for the next Secretary General would have on this organization, and especially on the interest in general public that has created. I'm very honored and very proud to be able to take part in this process. Especially since it really gives a chance to all the candidates to present themselves, to answer questions, not only from the member states, but also from the civil society. This has also created an interest within the civil society, within academia, within broader society, and I want to use this opportunity to congratulate the General Assembly, the President of the General Assembly, and the United Nations, everybody who has contributed to this new process.
Thank you. So we'll take a few questions.
Thank you. Good to meet you. Evelyn Leopold, Huffington Post contributor. You mentioned the internet. How else would you expand the communications at the United Nations? It falls short of a lot of things it does. How would you broadcast it? How would you expand it? And secondly, if I can ask, can you give your position on LGBT, on gays again?
How would I do it? Just following this example. When some of the processes and decision making within the United Nations became more transparent, it raised interest. It means that I think the organization needs to go more both in individual member states and internationally. It needs to go more out. It needs to communicate more with the media, with the journalists, in order to enable people to see what's happening there. I have to say myself, while I was preparing for this interview, I read probably more than 30 different reports, suggestions, papers, proposals. There are fantastic things there, really smart, really interesting, that nobody knows about. So we need to, this needs out. This somehow needs to be heard and communicated to the general public, discussed through the media, through journalists, through the internet, through civil society groups, town hall meetings. These are issues that really not only are important, but that there are some answers that are relevant, which are not communicated. So in a way, I would say, after having this much time studying, spending this much time studying, it's a better organization than it looks. It has way more potential and way more institutional memory, intellectual property than it's credited with. On LGBT, are you asking me why I said it? Why I didn't hide?
I'd like to hear it, and I'd like you to repeat it.
What they asked me was whether I would consider these the rights of the LGBT community as something that I would champion and think important and defend as human rights. And what you're usually told is, don't go there. Do not discuss that because this is controversial. And I know it's controversial. But so were many different things. Women's rights were also very controversial. They probably still are, in some quarters, very controversial. I approach human rights with the understanding that there are certain areas where the state has no business meddling, that are simply the space of the autonomy of the individual, and that should be respected. And certainly the LGBT rights are that type of rights.
Matthew Lee, Inner City Press. All of the candidates have been talking about transparency, and I just wanted to ask you whether, how much your government might devote to your campaign, in the sense that the minister of Montenegro said that he will make that disclosure. Just in many places in campaigns, people say how much is spent and behind it. And I also wanted to ask you, amid all the reports about peacekeeping operations and restructuring, there's also been what some people call a scandal, a number of indictments of a former president of the General Assembly, but also a businessman that bought events in the lobby, a document that was bought from the Secretariat. And I wanted to know, what are your thoughts on that? If you were to become Secretary General, what steps would you take to ensure that as things that happen, that documents can't be amended by means of a bribe, that events that take place in the lobby are what they say they are, et cetera? Thank you.
So far, my campaign has cost very little. It was the price of the tickets to New York and the price of the hotel and food. This is how far my campaign went, so it won't be a lot of money. I will probably come here maybe a few more times, maybe once or twice before they start deliberations, but this is sort of the extent. How to prevent the corruption scandals that happened in the past? One thing probably is to have everything that comes in and everything that goes out clearly documented. So no funds that are coming in outside of this prestige fund, nothing that goes out without clear decisions. And as I said, and as my experience from all the different things I've done in my life is, the simpler you make the procedure and the fewer exemptions you have, the easier it is to control and the smaller danger of stealing, which is sort of a maybe ruder name for corruption.
Question here, and then we'll go over there.
If you become secretary,
Tell us your name.
yes,
and your
Stefano
media
Vaccara is for Radio Radicale in Rome and La Voce di New York. If you become the next Secretary General, can you tell us how you will make sure the international law is respected? In the sense, what will be your position? What you will do in your position to make sure the international law? In this case, could you tell us your opinion on the agreement between the European Union and Turkey about the migrants wave that there are at the moment? What is your opinion about if the international law is respected?
First of all, they say, I come from a small country, as you know, and they say that small countries have no other friend but the international law. So, of necessity, let's say, out of my own experience, I certainly promote the respect and international law as the sort of instrument of regulating relations among countries and states. However, you know that there is a lot of opposition to that. So one thing that a Secretary General has at her disposal is tenacity. When at first you don't succeed, you try and try again. Force anybody, you cannot throw anybody out, and it would be bad if you could. But you can stick to your principles and your convictions, and by doing so, win maybe additional support, win additional countries to the side of the international law. Turkey, European Union, and refugees. Actually, from the 16th of September until the end of 2015, a little over 658,000 people came through my country, Croatia, which has 4.2 something million people. So it's never that many people were in the country at the same time. But they, within this, let's say 4 months, or 3.5 months, they passed through the country. None of them came directly from Syria, or Iraq, or Afghanistan for that matter. They all came from Turkey. Some of them were in Turkey for a few months. Some of them were in Turkey for a few years. So they were refugees in Turkey, and let's say in the case of Afghanis, they're sometimes treated as refugees, sometimes treated as migrants. And there was a considerable difference between these two groups of people. Very early on, Turkey has been alerting the international community and the European Union about the problem and the difficulties it is facing. I remember in early 2012, they were already talking about the number of refugees and the need for help. And everybody was patting them on the shoulder, but nobody did much. And when the number exceeded 2.5 million, these people started coming across again into Europe. Turks very early on said that they spend about 8 billion euros on the refugee. They demanded help that would amount to about 6 billion. They were offered 3.5 by the European Union. So it was, I think, a very unfortunate process with these millions of people in the middle who already had a sort of refuge. Turkey is a safe country, so they had a refuge in Turkey. But Turkey, like some other countries, like Jordan, like Lebanon, after a certain time, and we can say all kinds of things about it, but the truth is that they needed help. And I think they deserved help in caring for the refugees, and that they should get help from Europe and from around the world in caring for refugees.
Okay, let's take,
Whether this is in accordance with international law, if they were refugees in Turkey, yes, they were not endangered in the sense that they were endangered in Syria or in Iraq.
Let's follow up. So you think that the European and the EU and Turkey agreement respect the international law?
Yes, I think it respects international law, although I think it is a result of a sort of too long and unfortunate process of negotiations between two sides. I think it could have and should have been addressed at least a year ago.
should we take one last question? Okay. Wrap it up. So one last question over here.
Okay, so you just experienced for the first time, I suppose, the Israel problem at the UN, which is the stress of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict over all other Middle Eastern conflicts and other world conflicts. And the Israeli ambassador obviously complained about it. Since your campaign is going to take you beyond this room into capitals, including Washington, how are you going to address the Israel problem, especially in Washington? Which is, again, that the UN tends to, especially in the Human Rights Council and others, to stress Israel over every other country.
Well, the resolution of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict and the implementation of the two-state solution, if it was possible and done before, if it was possible to do it earlier, probably would change the entire landscape of the Middle East. And I'm not sure how would all the other conflicts, would they exist and what they would look like if this has been resolved, let's say, some time ago. It's not the only conflict, but it is very important. And it's crucial because the international community and the United Nations and the quartets and the European Union and the United States all have proven pretty helpless in facing it. And some crises that seemed as important or as big and deep and complicated in the meantime have been resolved, and this one is still with us. So I would say that this is what makes it so important. How would I address it? I would address it as I said, being probably in a way the mother of all conflicts in the Middle East, and through that being really key to a number of different issues that have arisen in the area in the meantime. How would UN approach it? The only answer I have to that, first-class excellent negotiator. This is not enough, but it's something that has proven more effective than any other things in case, for instance, of Staffan de Mistura in Syria. It was probably made more progress than a number of other things. But without political will, it's not going to happen.
Great, thank you very much.
In a question.
We'll do those later. We'll close the press conference here. Yeah, we'll do that later. Thank you very much indeed. We'll be back again at 5 o'clock for another stakeout. Thank you very much indeed. Congratulations.